Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fifth episode of Corpus Christi Forum. My name is Father Joseph Lopez. I'm the pastor at St. Gertrude the Great Catholic Church in Kingsville, Texas.
And I am Father Vasquez. I'm the pastor of St. John the Baptist in Corpus Christi, Texas.
And in this episode, we're going to be discussing the topic of vocations. And it is our intention that this is going to be the first episode of a few more episodes to come, that we will have guests on our episodes to speak about the vocations that they are living out. So again, that's our intention. But for this first episode, we're going to speak just about vocations in general, the vocation of priesthood, the fostering of vocations, how we do that, and maybe some recommendations, and how also how do we discern what's God's will for us in our lives. So first of all, just to begin, before we go further, as a definition, the word vocation comes from the Latin word vocare, to call, and it is something that each and every single one of us, through our baptism, have a vocation, and what we call a universal vocation by the virtue of our baptism. Every single one of us is called to be a holy person, a holy man or woman. And how we differ is how we live out that call to holiness. And that is what we call our personal vocation. So Father Vasquez and I, to the best of our ability, are living out our call to holiness through the vocation of holy orders. The other vocations that we have, other ways that we live out our vocation or to holiness, is through religious life, through the diaconate, through married life, and also through the single life. So Father Vasquez and I, as priests, we know a little bit about the vocation of priesthood and how we discern that. But also as pastors and priests belonging to a diocese, we also understand and also want to convey the importance of fostering vocations to priesthood and religious life, and also the need to pray for them. Not only the need, but also to pray for the young men and women who are currently in discernment. So, Father, you want to add a little bit about that?
Yeah, so at the beginning, what we wanted to talk about was the universal call to holiness, while we were setting us up to talk about the personal call. Well, what this means is that each one of us, all of us Catholics, are called by God to live a life of holiness. Now, that doesn't mean that we're all called to be canonized saints, but we're all called to live to the best of our ability like a canonized saint. We're called to live our life of holiness in our workplace. This is a very important topic at the Second Vatican Council, was the fact that every one of us, whether in religious or consecrated life, the priesthood, in married life, in the workplace, at home, that you can and are called by God to live holy lives. In other words, to live a life of fidelity to the Lord and to his holy church. But in particular, when we speak about particular vocations or personal vocations, which is what Father and I wanted to speak about today, these are specific callings from the Lord for a specific person. The vocation to marriage is an important one, and everyone should recognize that those who are called to be married are called by God to live that vocation. We are called, Father and I are called to a particularly different vocation in the life of the church, and that is the vocation of the priest, which is also a sacrament, and the sacrament of Holy Orders. And it is to this vocation that sometimes is a mystery for many people who don't quite understand how it happens, don't quite understand how one goes about knowing whether or not God is calling a young man to the priesthood, or a young woman or a young man to consecrated life.
So let's get into the fostering and the discernment steps a little bit later. But I think on some of the comments that we've received through our Facebook page, and also just personal interaction with people, I think a common question that has come up is, what was instrumental in your vocation discernment? Like how are you able to siphon that God really wanted you to live out your call to holiness as a priest. It was worded differently, but how do we go about doing that? So for me personally, what was very instrumental was a very strong parish community. My home parish is most parishes blood in Corpus Christi, and the first pastor there, very dedicated to the parish, um, and fostering vocations. The second pastor there, took up that same flag and instituted Eucharistic adoration, perpetual Eucharistic adoration. And I really believe, I didn't realize it at the time, but I really believe that now, looking back at it, it was super instrumental in my discernment process, knowing that there was people that saw me grow up from infancy into teenage years, were supporting me during my discernment process. Secondly, or together with that, not necessarily a second, together with that, a strong family support. Both of my parents, when I finally revealed to them what I was thinking about, were super supportive in my discernment process. Um, Continued to pray for me, and always, in more or less words, always told me, whatever you decide, we're going to be happy with. Just make sure that you feel that you're going to be happy with that. So, how about you? What was instrumental for you?
I think for me personally, it was connection with many priests early on in my life. My father was always concerned and cared for the younger priests who were foreign priests who had come from far away. They had been in our parish from Mexico, and sometimes right after ordination, they were far away, and he felt compassion for them, these young 26, 27, 28-year-old priests, and he took them under his wing, and they would often come to the house. I was 5, 6, 7 years old, and there was always priests who would come visit him, or would come visit the family, have dinner with us, spend some time on Sunday with us. And that continued on through my high school years. So that was really important for me. It was our family's personal relationship with priests, many priests. It was not uncommon for there to be a priest in the house when I was growing up. So for me, both the priest and my family linked in that experience, and that influence in my life was very important. And because of that, I became an altar boy right away as soon as I made my first communion. So I was in second grade, and of course at the time we were all just boys, and we were many boys. And for us, it was more than just serve one Sunday Mass. For us, it was sometimes serve 2 or 3 daily, weddings, funerals. Even if we had to skip school, we would be asked to come to the church to serve at Mass. And we were treated as, very important people in the church because of the fact that we were the ones who helped the priests and served at Mass. And that was really impactful to me. Our parish had many missions. So not only did we serve at the church, sometimes we'd end up going to some of the missions as well to help in the special events and everything that was happening in the church. We were kind of Father's assistants. At least that's the way we saw ourselves, with so many things. And so that was really impactful for me as well. Just that sort of, constantly being surrounded by positive, healthy influences of the church, of the priesthood, and of parish life. And as young men in a small town, we were in a small town where almost everybody in town was Catholic. I can still remember going to class, and some of us would either didn't turn in homework or get in trouble, and we were told, if you don't turn in your homework, you won't serve at Mass on Sunday at a public school. That's how important it was to everyone in town. They knew who the altar boys were and who the ones that needed to behave themselves and comport themselves well. And I think that was an enormous impact, huge influence in my life, even to this day. And so for me, that more than anything else, I think.
I think moving on, as I entered seminary, what was very helpful for me, because even when I went to seminary for priestly studies, for formation, I wasn't really completely convinced yet that this is what God wanted for me. But as I progressed through the years, so the vocation director at the time was very helpful in deciphering for me what my thoughts were and so forth. But once getting into seminary, especially in my third and fourth year in college seminary, and having broadly speaking, the priests that were at the seminary that were very dedicated to what they were doing in forming future priests, that was super helpful for me to be able to help me continue my discernment and then say, yes, all right, Lord, I will follow you in this way.
Mhm. Yeah, I think as you progress a little bit through life, my vocation began when I was very, very young. And so it was by necessity, therefore it was very immature. Um, and so it had to grow. And there were times where it was very beautiful. There was times when it was painful, but it was growing and it was changing. Um, I think for me, high school time was, it was expected by then because, my expression and my vocation had already been out there for a while. My parents very supportive of it. And so it was almost expected. But even then, there was always the thought that maybe there was something else for me, or that I would have other interests or pursue other interests, but never to a serious extent. I think I moved on into seminary right away. And at the beginning, it was tough. It was tough for me. It wasn't exactly easy. There was many, many reasons for that. But it also kind of helped me to mature in my vocation, to recognize how important it was, and to see that God was serious about this. Um, and so I think by the time I get to the end of my seminary formation, close to ordination, there had been a lot of growth, from a second grade little boy, altar boy, to now a man who's about to be ordained to the diaconate and to the priesthood. It had changed a lot. And even to now, the way I view my vocation today, it has also continued to grow and experienced a lot of beautiful moments and some painful moments too, um, and struggles. But nonetheless, no less firm than it was, I think, when I was a little boy. It has always been very, very strong in me. And so for me, I have seen how God has helped me to grow, helped me to change, but also to see it in the vocation as well, to see the way I experience it from a much more mature and even and each time really a very grateful heart to God for the vocation He's asked me um, to follow.
So I get a lot of questions also, especially when I was in my assignment as vocation director for the diocese, is how do you really know, or how are you convinced that this is what God wants of you, God's will for you? Um, for me, it was more of like I didn't hear a voice finally telling me like, okay, yeah, stop just trying to figure out what you're going to do. This is what I want. This is what I want you to do. It was something that I discovered. And that's the thing about vocation is not the personal vocation is not about making a decision. It's more about making a discovery about God's will. What is God's will? Discovering God's will for me, and that discovery happened actually when I was a junior already in seminary. When my spiritual director had asked me it was a little exercise that he had a spiritual exercise he wanted me to do in terms of fantasizing, fantasize yourself about being a priest, fantasize yourself about being married, fantasize yourself about being neither in terms of being single. And where do you find yourself at peace during those moments of prayer? And it took maybe about a full semester with that spiritual exercise. So finally, I kept going back to priesthood. I kept going back to that quote unquote fantasizing about being a priest. Um, that I really, and he helped explore that with me. That well, maybe maybe this is really where God is calling you. If your prayer life is leading you in that direction, even as long as you've given all the others a fair shake, in terms of the vocations that God may possibly be calling you to be married. Um, but if you keep going back towards living out as a priest, then maybe that's really what it is, God's will for you. So that sat with me for a little while, and then that's when I finally just made that leap. I said, okay, I'm done with my discernment, and I've discovered that this is God's will for me. And also realizing and understanding that if it's not, then something will make sure to come forward, and for me not to proceed in the following years as a priest. That's the way I felt. That's the way that I interpreted it. That's the way I moved forward. That if God didn't want me to do this, then eventually, either I would get kicked out or leave on my own for whatever reason. So that for me, that's how that happened. What about for you? How, if you can answer that, how would you, in terms of being convinced that this was a God wants from
I
you?
think it was a slow discovery for me. I think it was, I always had that strong inclining to the vocation, but every time a challenge would be presented to me, that would make me wonder, is this really what I want to do? Beginning through seminary time and all the way to the priesthood. I think there were moments that were really small. I call them today, speaking of them, like consolations from the Lord that only you know about, and only you can understand clearly the message sent to you. I mean, from the beginning, I remember, as a boy, maybe before even high school, I remember talking about it, and then there was doubt because some people would say, well, he's young, he doesn't know any better, he's considering something else, and you have this very older priest, very saintly priest at my parish who was there, and he would see me serve, and I served with him one time. And when I was about to leave, I told him, "Thank you, Father, for letting me serve for you." And he said, "Oh no, thank you, because I get to see a future priest." And he just said it that way, and it stuck to me. It was a real big moment. He was there when I was ordained and at my first mass, and I told him that story later, and he said he didn't remember. But that he was glad that he was able to somehow assist me in my path. But for many people, that might not mean a lot. For me, at the time, that was huge. And there were many moments like that, similar moments, in which I began to doubt, and then only to then receive some sort of confirmation that this is the right thing. This is obviously what God wants. As I got older, even into the priesthood, when we experienced challenge as well, it turned into even more spiritual. I think it turned into things like the Mass, for instance. Even when you struggle with whatever challenges come, or even doubt still whether this is still the vocation for you, always it was, but I experience great joy and love when I celebrate the Eucharist. And so it to me is a constant confirmation day in and day out that this is exactly where God wants what he wants from me. And I think there was never really an aha moment. It's just a constant discovery in small ways throughout my life, even to this day. No matter what comes, no matter what challenges come, it almost always happens that he'll send me something to just remind me, you're doing exactly what I want you to do. But there's always this, I'm letting this happen, or I'm giving this to you for growth and for you to conform yourself even more to me. So I think for me, that's the way I would best describe it, is in small ways, but very powerful ways.
And I think it's important, like both you and I, we're both diocesan priests. We're in the same diocese. We went to the same college seminaries, and I think it's important for people to know that both of our discoveries were very different. They
Yeah.
happen, but they're different. So it's important for people to understand it's not the same for everybody.
No, yeah, not at all. I mean, I remember talking to many of the guys at the seminary, and I think every vocation story is as different as every man, because those things, God deals with us based on us.
Hmm.
He knows us better than we know ourselves. So he knows what works with us and how to deal with us and what is good for us in order for us to become the kind of priest he wants us to be. And that's why it's very different for everybody. So, I mean, just in talking, you and I have known each other for a long time, but radically different vocation paths
Hmm.
get to the same end by the same Lord for the same church,
Right.
because that's very much like him. He knows us well, and he knows how to work with us to get us there. And it's about patience, I think, and learning to listen to him. But I think it's the tugging of the heart is more than anything else, is the way he at least I think that's the sort of common denominator in all of us. It's a desire that we begin to build and understand better and better as we get older and more mature.
And that's what one of those things that we call is zeal for souls. That's for us as priests. That should always be the common denominator, is that we have a zeal for souls. So you and I are priests in the Diocese of Corpus Christi, and
Yes.
We see that when we entered. In fact, I don't know if you remember this. When we entered seminary, we had over 35 seminarians studying
Yes.
to be a priest, right? So
Yes.
today we have, I believe it's 13, right? So that are currently in formation. We have a need for more priests in our diocese. The average age in our diocese continues to increase, and now Father Vasquez and I are no longer considered the young priests anymore. We're considered veterans. Imagine that. So we're considered veterans, and we're getting older. And now more than ever, we need to foster all vocations in general, but in particular vocations to priesthood and the religious life. How would you respond to the need to foster vocations for priesthood and religious life, praying for them, and how to foster vocations to the priesthood and religious life?
The first thing I would say is that we shouldn't lose hope in this, because it isn't as if God has chosen to no longer call young men. So we know that the disconnect, if we can say that the reason why we don't have the 35 we had before, or even more than that, and it seems like such a small number, is most likely because the culture is so powerful around us, and we have to learn how to be able to help young men see this vocation as a possibility in their life. In my parish, since I've been here, it's easy to believe, well, it's just that, young men don't want to become priests, or God isn't calling anymore. But I've gone through so many young people who have at least explored their vocation, and they take it seriously. They really consider it. And in some cases, I think there's some that may still venture back into that. I think getting to the point of having your parish have a seminarian or a young woman in the convent is one of the most beautiful aspects of parish life. It's a sign of a healthy parish too. But I think it's the work of the whole church, of families, of pastors like me and Father Lopez, of the formation programs in the churches. We're all in this because we all benefit from this, and we all need priests. It's easy for us to say, you need priests. I mean, I'm a priest, I have me, but
Yeah.
we all need the benefit of the priests in the church today. And so I think it's important for us as priests to actively work to foster them within the parishes, but also to encourage parishioners to constantly be praying for vocations to the priesthood. Just recently, I asked my parishioners to do two things. One is they're praying the rosary every day in my parish, and they have been for a couple of years, every morning. And part of their prayers has to be for vocations to the priesthood. And then helping to reinstitute an old mandate that was in this diocese under Bishop Garriga's time, to add a Hail Mary to our prayer before meals for vocations to the priesthood. In doing these things, praying, and by fostering, we mean encouraging, or at least to make it as a possible choice for young people, to encourage them to consider it, whatever vocation God may be calling them to. Those are very important fundamental ways in which we must do this now more than ever, because the church needs priests. It has always needed priests. But it seems like in our time, we need good, holy priests to come up from our communities to serve our church, to serve the church here locally.
I think what's been very helpful also in Kingsville, at least, is a very vibrant Newman Center at the Texas A&M Kingsville. So we currently have three that are studying for the Diocese of Corpus Christi that have been through. I'm sorry, four. We have four that have been through the Newman Center,
Mhm.
and three of them have St. Gertrude Parish as their home parish, and whenever they're here, they're very good about visiting the parish. And what I found is very helpful. I've never really spoken to them about this, but at least as a pastor, as a priest, it's very encouraging to me. This is the amount of support that the parishioners give to the seminarians when they, not only when they're not, but especially when they are present here for their summer visits or Christmas or Easter breaks and so forth. And that goes a long way, because a lot of people don't realize the impact that the parishioners are having when they outwardly express their encouragement to the seminarians that they see on the young man that might be sitting right next to them in the pew.
Yeah.
That they applaud them or whatever, however that expression is, and the young man sees that, wait, this is a good thing. This is something good that I might want to consider, not to receive the applause, but this is something that people support.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important for people to understand, our outward expression towards, not only towards the priests, but also towards the seminarians and those that are studying in formation for religious and consecrated life, how impactful that is to the young men and women that surround them. Right? I think it's also important in terms of vocations, fostering vocations. If someone sees a person, as an example, a young man or woman that's kneeling down at the end of the pew, and they see them Sunday after Sunday, they're by themselves or even with their family, and see that how prayerful they are, or even they might even be active in the parish through different ministries. And if they have a tug in their heart, let's say John Smith has a tug in his heart and through his prayer that he feels that young man, Johnny, he might be a good priest one day. I would encourage people to take a step forward and ask him. And that's what we call the sacred moment, not to be flippant about it. Don't say something flippant means, in a joking way, and say something like, hey, Johnny, I think you look good in black. You should consider being a priest. No, because what happens is we're downgrading the importance of that vocation. Rather, there are different ways to do it. Rather, pull the young man aside. If he happens to be by himself, pull the young man aside and say something along the lines of, I've noticed you in prayer. I've noticed you in this particular ministry, whether it be an altar server or reader, whatever the case may be. And, I feel that you might have qualities to be a priest someday. Have you ever thought about it? And even if the young man, just shrugs it off, say, oh no, I never thought about it, whatever, get away from me, creep. The point is, his life will be changed forever by
Mm.
that simple, maybe not even taking 20 seconds. His life will be changed forever by that simple statement.
Yeah.
And I think we're missing that nowadays. I think a lot of times, we say our prayers and so forth, our Hail Marys and rosaries, and that's great. But I think nowadays we need to be a little bit more proactive with it, in addition to. And because of this society that we live in that you mentioned earlier, there's so many distractions that our young people have, that we need to be part of that competition of getting their attention. And it's so important. And again, in my vocation work, as a vocation director, I saw that so often, that our young men and women are so distracted. Everything's competing for their attention, and we got to be part of that competition. Um, I think it's also important too, for any young man or woman that is discerning. We also get a lot of questions. Well, how do I go about doing this? Is there a best way? What are the best practices? Um, are there best ways to do it? The answer is yes and no. As we mentioned earlier, both of us, we ended in the vocation of priesthood, but yet arrived very differently in our discovery of that vocation. But the first and foremost thing that I would always recommend is remove the obstacles to discernment. Try to remove as many obstacles and distractions that may be filtering out the voice of God in our life, in our prayer. So one way is removing all of the misinformation that we hear about priests and sisters. So, for example, the only reason why that we became priests is because we couldn't land a steady date. So therefore, we decided to go to priesthood, or something like priests only work one day a week, and that's Sunday, and the rest of the week they lollygog and they don't have any fun and they're lonely people. Or sisters, living in a convent and community is so oppressive. I would never want to do something like that. Or priests or sisters never have any fun. Or that outfit that they wear, please, no bling, forget about it. So I think removing those distractive misinformation is very important, and rather getting good information and speaking to priests. You mentioned, Father, that one of the ways that you started to in your discernment as a young man was being surrounded by priests, and experiencing their lives. And I think it's important too. It's even if you're discerning marriage, that look at the married people around you and see, is that something that I want to emulate. But also, talking to priests, talking to sisters, and getting good information and taking that information to prayer and discern with that, and ask God, what is it you want me to do for you for the rest of my life? You want to speak a little bit to that in regards to discernment?
Yeah, I think it's important to give it serious consideration, first of all, and doing so, as you mentioned, to get rid of distractions and that sort of thing. But I also think a strongly rooted prayer life is very important. It's vital to a vocation, no matter if you're considering the vocation to marriage. If you're dating a girl and you think this is the girl I want to be married to, a strong prayer life, asking God, is this the right move for me? Is marriage the right vocation for me? And this is the right person for me? In the very same way, I would encourage anyone who's considering the priesthood or a young woman consecrated life, things like attendance at Mass, even daily Mass, if possible. That would be so beneficial for that. Many of our parishes have Eucharistic adoration, and you mentioned it, Father, that it was instrumental in your life. That is also an important way in which we can help to foster within ourselves a vocation to the priesthood. Sorry,
okay, hold on. So your dog came in. Introduce your dog. Can you
hear them?
Yes.
Well, actually, I have 5 dogs, and they're all sitting at my feet right now. If one of them bumps up, I'll let you see them.
Okay. Sorry.
That's okay. They're all moving around because they hear me talking, so they think I'm talking to them. So prayer life is really important. And as you said, speaking to a priest, I would interview a priest, especially not everybody has the ability to have, you can see Rocky right here at my, right there. Not everyone has the ability to have priests in their homes, but setting up a time to ask real questions of priests. What's your life like? What do you do? What does your day look like? And what did it take for you to get to this point? Is it true that priests don't have fun or sisters don't have fun? And what kind of things do you do other than your work as a priest? I mean, I could tell you all kinds of things of the various different ministries and assignments that I've had, from teaching high school, coaching baseball, serving in parish life, office life. There's been quite a lot of different things that I never thought I would be doing as a priest. So some of those things are, really vital to the priesthood, and it's important for someone who's considering that to really explore that. I did want to say something though. One of the things that I hear a lot from parishioners, ask me this all the time. Well, if we have such a vocation shortage, is the language people sometimes use, well, then maybe that means that it's time for the church to change some of its rules about the priesthood, celibacy, for instance, and allowing priests to marry. My answer to them has always been, that's not the problem. It never really is the problem. It isn't as if we were forced into it, and then later we're told, like right before ordination, oh, by the way, you also can't be married. This was freely chosen by us. It's a struggle. It's not easy at all, because it's a sacrifice. My answer to people always is, don't take away our chance to sacrifice. That's our way of being sacrificial and offering it to the Lord. And it's very important for the priests. I've never met young people who object to that at all. They consider it. They think about the priesthood. They know that's part of it, and it's not really the reason why they choose otherwise. I think sometimes it could be the lack of confidence, which is something that you pointed to. Could I be a good priest? Could I do what these men do? And sometimes they think maybe this isn't for me because maybe I can't do it. Because priesthood becomes very mysterious and not sure what their life is like. It isn't fear of well, I'm going to be lonely or I won't have a spouse. It's never really that. And not in my experience do I ever hear it from young people. I think it more often than not is not really knowing what the priesthood really is and what it looks like on a daily basis, and therefore maybe just not sure that they're worthy enough of it. And I think that's why it's key for us to ask young men to consider the priesthood. I mentioned it early that it was a priest who was very confident about it. He was an older priest, and I respected him greatly. He's now deceased, but I remember him saying it to me. I'm in the presence of a future priest. So he saw it, which told me, if this priest thinks that I could be, then maybe I really I can be. And I think once a young man sees that, hears that from parishioners, from his priest, from a bishop, from the community at large, the parish at large, that gives them the confidence that I can do this. This is doable by me, and I do have gifts that other people see that will lend to being a priest. I think part of that lack of confidence too is thinking things like, well, I don't know if I can get up there and talk to people.
Yeah.
I can be honest and say that was one of my fears at the beginning. I remember even asking in the seminary, is it possible that I could be a priest without having to give a homily, without having to speak in public?
Yeah.
But God has his ways of surprising us in many ways and showing us things that later on we never really realized that we had the talent to do. And the fears that we had were childish fears and fears that we ought not to worry. If this is what God wants, he'll find a way and give you whatever it is that he needs to give you in order for you to do whatever you need to do to serve his church.
I remember something that I share with young men with who are discerning priesthood and have those same questions in terms of, I don't know if I have the skills. And what God, the way I see it is that God isn't calling men who are already ready to be priests to the seminary. He's not calling young women who are already ready to be sisters into the convent. No, he calls young men and women who are willing and able to serve. And then after that, he'll take care of the rest. He'll make sure that we have the graces and the skill set necessary to hone in on the skills that we already have to make sure, to equip us to make sure that we are successful in the vocation that he has chosen for us.
Years of formation for you and for
Yes.
me. It was
Yes.
a long time of being formed before we made our commitments, before we said our yes to the vocation. At the beginning, it was just responding to the Lord's invitation to consider it and then letting him do his work in us.
Also, it's very important. I think this is the last point. For those that is discerning, I always like to refer to discipleship, right? So, and what that is having an encounter with our Lord through prayer. You mentioned prayer, how important that is. And one of the best ways to do that is through a conversation with him through prayer, and having those opportunities to be able to encounter him in different ways. And it comes for different people. It can be discipleship can be fostered through prayer. It can be fostered through missionary service work. It could be fostered through ministry, liturgical ministries in the parish and so forth, attendance at daily mass. But the important thing is making sure that there's that encountering that's happening with our Lord, and include the Blessed Mother in there too, because she's very important, with this. She's the mother of all vocations. She's the one that first said yes. I will do your will in my life. So it's very important. Pray that first we become good disciples of our Lord, and then start moving into, all right, Lord, how do you want me to serve you in this discipleship? Yeah. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be having, our intention is to have guests. We spoke obviously a lot about priesthood in this episode, but our intention is to have guests that are living out their vocation of holiness through the other vocations of religious life and marriage and single life. So be on the lookout for that. If you have any comments or questions in the future, please send them in. So now, do you know what time it is?
Yes, I do.
Fourth quarter. What's your question? Okay.
Well, as you know, today we're going to talk a little bit, kind of both sports, but we want to talk a little bit about baseball. A couple of days ago, the MLB issued its proposed plan to reopen baseball. Baseball should be playing right now. It should be a good month into the season, if not a little bit more, actually about 6 weeks into the season. So that's missing, and it's starting to be impactful in many sports fans that there isn't a baseball game to watch on television. So Major League Baseball came out with this plan. I wanted to ask you, Father, what you thought about its sort of cut season beginning, I think, 4th of July or right around that time, with separate kind of divisions and things like that. What do you think about the possibility?
So I looked at the proposed plan. It's an 82 game season, and there's no division realignments. What I found very interesting, which means that the schedule will be geographically based. So American League East will play American League East. American League East will play National League East, and National League West will play American League West. And what I found so interesting about that, which means if this proposal goes through, that the Dodgers will play the Astros in a quote unquote rematch, right? My concern is that while this has been approved by the owners and Major League Baseball, it still has to be approved by the president and the state government. But it also has to be approved by the union, the players' union. And one of the points of the proposal is stating that there's going to be a salary cut, which I can understand because there's less games and they're starting without any fans and they're missing a lot of their revenue. So therefore, they may not even have money to be able to pay them their full salary, so again, I can understand the player cut, but I think it's going to go through a lot of revisions because the players, I don't think, are going to accept it right away. There might be some, revisions, and again, the president and the state governments may not approve it. But if everything goes through and approved, and we can start, spring, if they want to start resume spring training in June in order for opening day in July, I think it would be great. I think it would be really, really good, and I think it would be a morale boost for the country.
Yeah. I think it was about 2 days ago they proposed sort of Plan B.
Okay.
And it was a thought that was, or a plan that was kind of thrown out there as a possibility, because the problem is the states and how they're all, some reopening, some not reopening quick enough. And so you have California teams that are still probably not ready to start playing in their stadiums, whereas Texas teams may be playing sooner than them. And so the idea was to play at spring training sites and basically create the Cactus League and the Grapefruit League, and the teams that play there would play each other until it was time to pick a champion on each end and to play a World Series, probably in a dome stadium in a neutral site. I don't like either plan, to be honest with you, because it's not the norm. Unfortunately, we can't do much about that at all, I think. But the sooner that baseball can get back, the better. The sooner football can get back, the better. I think Major League Baseball may be looking a little bit at the way the NFL is handling some of its challenges too. I think the NFL seems to be taking the lead a little bit more, maybe even than baseball. But I think it's important. It's important for the psyche of the country that we begin to see our teams play again, even if it's no one there, but we can still watch them play again. I'm tired of tuning into MLB Network, NFL Network, or ESPN for them talking about nothing, because there's nothing to watch, and other than old games. I was actually earlier today, I was watching a baseball game on MLB Network from 1975 World Series, and I was really excited about it because I didn't know the outcome of it. But it's such an old game. Who cares about that? And I think it would go a long way in helping Americans cope with this. I do have another question, and that is, since the last time we recorded our episode, and it aired last Friday evening, the NFL issued its schedule for this year. I didn't know if there was something that maybe caught your attention, or a game in the Cowboys schedule that might be of great interest to you, or something that just stood out for you.
So yes, um, I mean the Cowboys schedule is a great pathway to the Super Bowl. And within that, I'm not sure if anybody, if everybody's caught this, and there have been some commentators on this, but the Cowboys, their schedule, I believe, was put together by God, because the stars have aligned, and the Cowboys have an opportunity to do something this year that no other NFL team has been able to do. And that is run through and complete the Bird Gauntlet, right? And what that is, right? And
Yeah.
what that is that on their schedule, their regular season schedule, they play every team that has a bird as a mascot. Right?
Yes.
So they're the Falcons, the Seahawks, the Cardinals, the Ravens, and of course the Eagles.
The dreaded Eagles.
Now, the last time something like this was done was in 1992 by the Washington Redskins, but this was prior to the Ravens being in the NFL. So now you have the Cowboys given an opportunity to be the first team to do this, and it's very, very rare that someone's regular season schedule has all 5 birds, right? But the Lombardi Trophy, that's great. The Hall of Fame jacket, that's wonderful. The bronze busts, that's great. But to be able to have a nest to rest your Lombardi Trophy would be awesome. So I say my prediction: Cowboys will be the Bird Gauntlet winners in this one.
Wow. I would never have guessed that that's what you were going to talk about. Great. I was really only thinking about 2 things. First is the Cowboys start in Los Angeles. Their season opener is at the new stadium, hoping that it's open and that they'll be able to play in there. It'd be great to see it. I think that's kind of cool. Plus the fact that the Rams have new uniforms, really nice new uniforms. I really like them. A little more, a new style, but a little retro at the same time, but also simple, which I really thought was kind of neat. So it'd be nice to see that. And I think the game that catches my attention happens right before Christmas, is the Cowboys against the Ravens, which, as you heard me speak last week, is, in my opinion, the preview for the Super Bowl.
Right.
So it could be a really big game by that time. So hopefully by December, I think it's December 20th,
December 3rd.
or December 3rd, Cowboys and Ravens will be a huge game, or the game of the week, because the 2 teams are playing well, and it'll be sort of a preview of what the Super Bowl might be like. So that's what I was looking at. I took a peek when the Cowboys play the Redskins, Giants, and Eagles, and at their place, and when they come here, but that happens every year. I was surprised that they said that the Cowboys had the 3rd easiest schedule, or even one said 4th easiest schedule. I'm not exactly sure how that is when you are playing the Ravens and the 49ers and the Seahawks, and then of course your own division. It seems tough to me, but I think the Cowboys will be fine. But if you're going to be the champs, you got to beat the best teams in football. So I think the Cowboys are well equipped to do that. But it would be those are the things that caught my attention with the schedule this year.
So just the last point, and it's to your point in terms of the Ravens game. So that happens December 3rd. It's a Thursday night game. It happens December 3rd, and that's the last bird they have to beat.
There you go.
I mean, they have the Eagles. They have the Eagles 2 weeks later, but they will have already played the Eagles first. So then they will. That's the fifth bird they're playing. It could be huge. It could be huge. I mean, movies and books are going to be made about this.
There will be nests all over
All
AT&T.
over. I'm gonna wear a nest on my head. I don't care. I'll wear it like a hat. I don't care. I'll have a Lombardi a trophy sitting inside it.
I think we should have.
I'm gonna walk into mass with that.
I think we should have those old. I mean, I don't know if you remember those ribbons that you used to get in high school when your teams would be playing, the next town, and it said something like, roast the birds or something like that. I think we really should have one for every one of those games. That says roast the birds or throw away the dirty birds or whatever. I don't know, something like that.
That's old school. Yes,
cool.
right. We're gonna get into that. Yes, I'm gonna do some research.
All right, maybe we can wear them for our shows.
All right, everybody. Well, once again, thank you for joining us in this 5th episode. As a reminder, send in your comments, your questions, your thoughts about future topics. We do have a number, something Father and I are discussing, how we're going to put those in order. But we definitely want to send our appreciation to those that have made your suggestions for topics. Be assured to stay safe, wash your hands, don't touch your face, and look forward to seeing y'all next week. God bless you.
God bless you all.